There are wounds no one sees, quiet scars left behind by people who once promised to stand beside you. Not all pain bleeds. Some of it settles deep in the soul, where it festers in silence. They smiled in your face while poisoning your peace. They used your goodness, your loyalty, your silence, and then they walked away, untouched and unbothered, as if your suffering was a casual inconvenience. They didn't look back, not once. They didn't pause to ask what their absence might do to your spirit. They didn't think twice about the nights you'd lie awake, piecing together your shattered trust, your trembling sense of self-worth. It was easy for them, wasn't it? To leave destruction in their wake while they danced into new chapters, cloaked in the illusion of freedom. But just because they left doesn't mean they escaped. The universe, you see, is never blind, and God, the keeper of justice and mercy, is never indifferent to the cries of a broken heart. While they thought they were stepping over your pain like debris beneath their feet, heaven was writing every detail down, recording every betrayal, every manipulation, every silent torment you endured. Their cruelty was not forgotten, it was being measured. And what if the God who watched you cry behind closed doors is the same God who now prepares the storm for them to walk through? What if the very weight they placed on your shoulders becomes the burden they must carry? Not as punishment, but as revelation, a mirror to their own hearts. Do you believe God turns away from injustice? Do you think divine love overlooks cruelty simply because it hides behind charm or false righteousness? No. Love, true love, is not blind. It is just. It protects. It restores, and it corrects. The ones who wounded you and walked away will one day face the echoes of their own actions, not because you wished it, but because God is a God of holy balance. You see, suffering is not always about what was done to you. It is also a teacher of what must be undone in others. There is a divine reversal that unfolds in time, a season when tables turn, not out of vengeance, but out of divine necessity. Just as the potter must break and reshape the flawed vessel, so too must the arrogant be brought low. The deceivers face truth, and the ones who hurt you be led through their own valley of affliction. You will not always see their harvest, but make no mistake, it will come. Not in the way you imagined, not by your hand, but by the same God who lifts the humble and humbles the proud. There is a reckoning reserved for those who inflicted pain and called it love, who walked away without looking back. And as you continue forward, healing with heaven's help, they will begin to experience what they gave you, not as a curse, but as a lesson. Written in their own language, you became the mirror they refused to look into. Now life will hold that mirror up until they see every fragment of what they tried to bury. So then, what does this mean for you? It means you must release your need for revenge and let God be your defender. It means you must trust the unfolding of divine justice even when the world seems unfair, because the one who saw you at your lowest is also the one who will raise you to your highest, and in doing so, make your story the testimony that pain never wins, when God is the author. Let's now walk into the 7 powerful truths that will open your eyes to how this divine reversal unfolds. The pain they planted will become the road they must walk. There are moments in life when the pain someone inflicts on us feels too precise to be accidental. Their words are sharp not because they slipped, but because they aimed. Their actions, silent withdrawals, cold shoulders, veiled mockery, weren't missteps, they were choices. And you stood there, often bewildered, asking yourself, what did I do to deserve this? But pain, when planted unjustly, doesn't simply vanish into the soil. It grows, it transforms, and eventually it builds the road the planter must walk. The strange thing about suffering is that it doesn't just fall on the one who receives it. It is a living thing that returns. The book of Proverbs tells us, "Whoever digs a pit will fall into it. If someone rolls a stone, it will roll back on them." Proverbs 26:27. This is not superstition, it is spiritual architecture. God in His divine wisdom has written balance into the universe, and pain, unjustly given, is never a seed without fruit. But those who caused your anguish thought they were walking away from a finished act. What they failed to understand was that they didn't just leave you with wounds, they left behind a trail. And in God's time, they must return down that very trail, only now the sharp stones they placed in your path will press into their own feet. It is not about vengeance. The road is not paved in your bitterness, but in the justice of God. The world may believe that pain is weakness, that if you forgive and stay silent, you have surrendered. But that silence is sacred. It is a signal to heaven that you trust God to do what your hands should not. Psalm 37, 5-6 assures us, "Commit your way to the Lord. He will make your righteousness shine like the dawn, the justice of your cause like the noonday sun." You were never forsaken. You were being watched over while the soil shifted. When God prepares this road for them, He does not do it to destroy, but to reveal. He shows them their own reflection in the very hurt they once delivered. They may trip, stumble, and ask the same questions you asked, and in that moment your pain will become their teacher. What you carried in silence, they will carry aloud. What you endured behind closed doors, they will meet in broad daylight. And this isn't cruelty, it is clarity. They must walk it, not because you demand it, but because God allows it. The road exists so the soul that once disregarded yours may learn to regard its own. And as they walk, the distance they put between themselves and their wrongdoing begins to shrink. Every step becomes a reckoning, not the kind born of punishment, but of revelation. The pain they planted matures, and now it bears witness not just against them, but for you. It testifies that you were never forgotten. God will echo your silent cries into their loudest regrets. Silence is not always a void. Sometimes it is the loudest sound in the kingdom of God. The tears you cried in the darkness, the prayers whispered into the night, the ache in your chest that no one noticed, none of it was lost. Every silent cry you uttered was heard, not just as a moment of weakness, but as a sacred testimony of your trust. While others heard nothing, God heard everything. There is a reason David wrote, "You keep track of all my sorrows. You have collected all my tears in your bottle. You have recorded each one in your book." Psalm 56:8. God is not distant from our pain. He archives it. He preserves it. Because one day, that very pain will rise like a voice and speak, not to shame you, but to correct what was done to you. When they hurt you and walked away, they believed your silence was surrender. They mistook your grace for guilt, your restraint for weakness. But silence, in the hands of a righteous person, is often the most powerful cry. It is the language of those who refuse to repay evil with evil. And that kind of silence is never wasted. It becomes an echo. God is the translator of pain. He takes what you could not express and turns it into truth that pierces hearts. The ones who dismissed your suffering will one day hear your cries, not from your mouth, but from within their own conscience. You won't have to speak. Life will speak for you. Their regret will not come because you demanded justice, but because truth has a way of resurfacing, like water pressing through cracks in stone. Regret is not a punishment, it is a mirror, and when God allows it to come, it is because He knows it's the only thing strong enough to open eyes that were once blind to kindness. The very people who left you in emotional ruin will one day sit alone, hearing the echo of your silence in their own mind, not as noise, but as conviction, not as accusation, but as a question. How could I have done this to someone so loyal, so pure, so undeserving? You see, God does not only restore the broken, He awakens the breakers. He interrupts the comfort of those who harmed others, and in doing so, He reminds the world that He is not only the comforter of the wounded, but the confronter of the unjust. Your silent cries become heaven's instrument of justice, and as regret pierces their once cold hearts, you will not need to be present. God is capable of delivering the message you never could. He is the one who takes what was hidden and brings it to light, not to destroy, but to redeem. The weight of your tears will rest on their conscience. There is something sacred about tears that are born in silence. They are not weakness, nor are they signs of despair. They are prayers in liquid form, the soul's last language when words fail. Every tear you shed when you were hurt, misunderstood, betrayed, or left behind did not fall unnoticed. It may have felt like the world was blind to your breaking, but heaven was not. In fact, in the kingdom of God, tears are weighty. They carry a holy gravity that the conscience cannot outrun forever. Those who hurt you may have walked away, content in their denial, convinced that time would dissolve the memory of their wrongdoing, but time is not their ally. Time, in God's hands, becomes a slow unveiling. It does not erase truth, it brings it into clearer focus. And with time comes the haunting echo of what was once brushed aside. The laughter they shared while you cried, the comfort they embraced while you trembled. These memories do not fade, they ferment, and when the conscience awakens, it does not tap lightly. It roars, your tears were not spilled in vain. In Ecclesiastes, we are reminded that God will bring every deed into judgment, including every hidden thing, whether it is good or evil, Ecclesiastes 12:14. That includes every whispered lie, every cold shoulder, every act of cruelty disguised as silence. The tears you wept, alone, unacknowledged, are evidence now written on the tablets of justice. And so, the conscience of those who caused the pain will begin to bear the weight of your weeping, not all at once, but slowly, subtly. It may start as a passing thought, an unexpected image of your face, a sound that reminds them of your voice, a place that echoes your absence, and soon it grows. The memory they buried becomes the voice they cannot silence. Your tears begin to weigh down their spirit, not because you cursed them, but because you were innocent and they were not. That weight is not a punishment. It is the soul's attempt to awaken itself, to confess not aloud but inwardly, where the eyes of God gaze more deeply than any mortal judge could. The burden they now carry is not one you created, but one they built, and it cannot be transferred, ignored, or destroyed. It must be carried. That is the justice of heaven, not revenge, but revelation. Your tears have done their work in the heavens. Now they begin their work on earth, not to drown the ones who hurt you, but to baptize them in the truth they tried to escape. A conscience can run for years, even decades, hiding behind accomplishments, noise, new relationships, but one day, quietly and inevitably, it remembers. And when it does, your tears will no longer be invisible. They will be the mirror that shows them who they truly became. They will meet themselves in the mirror of their own cruelty. It is a dreadful thing to believe you have escaped the consequences of your actions. The illusion of freedom is often more dangerous than punishment itself. For those who harm others and walk away unscathed, the most terrifying moment is not when they are confronted. It is when they are left alone. Alone long enough for the silence to begin whispering truth. Alone long enough to see a reflection not bathed in flattery or distraction, but in raw, undeniable honesty. This is the moment when they meet themselves. Cruelty has a strange way of returning, not always in the same form, but in the form most necessary for revelation. It is never God's desire that souls should perish in darkness, but rather that they awaken, and so, in His wisdom, He allows the cruel to become their own revelation. The mirror does not lie. It does not flatter. It waits patiently, showing them the very expressions they inflicted on others: your tear-streaked face, your withdrawn silence, your trembling spirit. All of it appears again, but this time on their own countenance. And that mirror will not crack under denial. It reflects not only what they did, but who they became when they did it. The book of Galatians warns us, do not be deceived. God is not mocked. A man reaps what he sows. Galatians 6:7. It is not karma, it is design, divine law that ensures no act vanishes into meaninglessness. What they gave out must return, not to harm, but to awaken. The awakening is brutal, not because God is cruel, but because truth, when long avoided, hits the hardest. They begin to see themselves not as they appear in the eyes of admirers, but as they truly are. Someone who could look at kindness and respond with contempt. Someone who could receive loyalty and repay it with abandonment, and that vision is unbearable to the soul that once felt invincible. They will ask themselves questions they never dared to ask. Was I really that cold? Did I truly mean to hurt them? How could I have been so blind? And in those moments, you do not need to speak. The mirror speaks for you. It shows them every gesture, every word, every absence that became your suffering. And now, the weight of their own reflection becomes their teacher. It is not retribution, it is redemption's beginning. For no one can truly change until they have seen the full face of their own cruelty, until they have watched the same darkness they cast on others begin to shadow their own joy, their own relationships, their own peace. The mirror God holds is not just for judgment, it is for healing. But before healing there must be honesty, and before honesty there must be the courage to see oneself truly. What they once ran from, they now must face. Not because you waited for it, but because the justice of heaven always leads the heart back to the truth it tried to avoid. In the end, it is not your pain that destroys them. It is the reflection of who they were when they caused it. Arm the singer a courage, a light that went out in me that helped me to fly. What they took lightly will become heavy in their hands. There is a peculiar blindness that settles over those who believe they have the power to hurt another without consequence, a blindness born not of ignorance, but of arrogance. They see your kindness, your patience, your vulnerability, and mistake it for weakness. They take your devotion as something disposable, your love as something common, and when they walk away, they carry with them pieces of your soul as though those fragments were weightless, as though hearts were things meant to be touched and tossed aside without care. But the things they took lightly were never light at all. What they abandoned in haste will become the very burden they cannot drop. For in the divine order of justice, nothing is ever truly taken without cost. Nothing sacred is dismissed without being missed. The very grace they received without gratitude will become the heaviness they cannot explain. You gave your best, not just in gestures or words, but in spirit. You offered your loyalty in a world that trades it like currency, and in return, they took what was holy and treated it like dust. The book of Hebrews tells us it is a fearful thing to fall into the hands of the living God. Hebrews 10:31. And those words are not meant to scare the innocent. They are a warning to those who trample on what is pure. God does not overlook what others treat lightly, what they dismissed as insignificant, your sacrifices, your compassion, your tears. He counted as sacred. And because they cast aside what heaven honored, there comes a time when the weight of their choices returns. Slowly, invisibly, but surely. It begins with a restlessness. The relationships they entered to replace yours begin to feel hollow. The peace they pretended to carry starts to tremble. And in their hands once so eager to grasp control, they now find a heaviness they cannot drop. The laughter fades, the distractions wear off, and suddenly the things they once considered light begin to press on them like stones in their pockets. Their memory starts to weigh them down. The words they spoke carelessly begin to echo louder. The moments they overlooked begin to revisit them, not as nostalgia, but as reminders. And the heart they treated as optional now becomes the source of their unrest. It is not punishment, it is spiritual law. What is sown without reverence must be harvested with gravity. They may try to dismiss the feeling, they may rationalize it, drown it in busyness, blame others, or rewrite the story. But the truth doesn't vanish. It lingers. It walks beside them. What they took lightly follows them until it becomes impossible to ignore. What once felt weightless becomes unbearable. And in that unbearable weight lies the proof that your presence was never insignificant. You were never a phase. You were never replaceable. Your value was real, but they could not see it through their pride. And now, in the silence of reflection, the burden of that blindness grows heavier. God, in His justice, allows them to feel what they could not see. He gives them what they gave you, not to destroy, but to reveal. The heaviness they carry is not meant to break them, but to awaken them. It is the very evidence that heaven defends the pure, that spiritual weight is measured not by man's standards, but by divine discernment. You, who were once seen as too much, will now be recognized as the one they could never truly hold. The burden they carry now is not you. It is the realization of what they lost. And that realization has a weight nothing in this world can lift. You were their test. Now they become the lesson. There are certain encounters in life that are not coincidences. They are assignments. You were not placed in their path simply to pass the time. You were sent, like a candle in a cold room, to offer warmth where there was none, to provide light where shadows reigned. You didn't just walk into their life by accident. You were woven into their story by a higher hand. And in that sacred interweaving, your presence became a test, not of your worth, but of their character. And what they did with you was never just about you. It was about what was inside them. You were their opportunity to honor something pure, to handle something fragile with reverence, to rise above selfishness and become more than what they were. But instead of embracing the grace of your presence, they chose to exploit it. Instead of seeing you as a divine gift, they treated you like a temporary convenience. The test was never whether you could endure their betrayal. It was whether they would honor your loyalty. They failed that test. And now, in the divine classroom of consequence, they have become the lesson. God often places people in our lives not only for blessing, but for revealing. You were a mirror held before them, not just to reflect your love, but to expose their inability to receive it. And the tragedy is, not only in what they did to you, but in what they revealed about themselves when they did it. What was meant to elevate them revealed their emptiness. What was offered as healing exposed their own wounds. You were never the problem. You were the proof. The scriptures echo this truth over and over. To whom much is given, much will be required. Luke 12:48. And when someone is given access to your heart, your prayers, your support, your very soul, what they do with that access becomes a measure of their maturity. They were given much, not in material things, but in spiritual opportunity. And now, having misused it, they must sit in the school of consequence. Lessons don't arrive in the form of thunder. They unfold in silence. First in missed peace, then in broken patterns. Next, in relationships that cannot fill the void they thought you once occupied unnecessarily. Life becomes a mirror, and every new connection starts to remind them of what they mishandled. Every moment of discomfort, every shadow of guilt, every small reminder becomes part of the curriculum. They are now learning, line by line, hour by hour, what it means to lose something they never truly valued. This isn't the cruel machinery of karma. It is the discipline of heaven. God does not waste tests. He does not ignore failures of the heart. When someone abuses grace, heaven rewrites the narrative until the abuser begins to understand not only what they did, but what they missed. And nothing is more painful than realizing that what once looked ordinary was sacred, what once felt replaceable was rare. You were a test of love, of honesty, of honor, and they failed not by accident, but by choice. They chose self-preservation over connection. They chose pride over apology. They chose ego over empathy. And now they become the example, the cautionary tale. Heaven uses to remind others what happens when purity is betrayed. It is a humbling process. God, in His mercy, doesn't often humiliate, but He does humble. He dismantles illusions brick by brick until only the truth remains. They begin to see themselves as they truly are, not the victim, not the righteous, not the clever one who got away, but the soul who could not recognize the treasure they were entrusted with. And that recognition burns deeper than any external punishment ever could. This is why your absence is more powerful than your presence ever was. While you were near, they were blind, but in your distance they begin to see. They see your worth not just in memory, but in contrast. You become the silent whisper that follows them into empty moments, the echo that haunts their comfort. You are now the benchmark by which they measure all that comes after, and everything else falls short. They do not realize this all at once. Spiritual lessons unfold slowly. At first they deny, then they deflect. But over time, denial dissolves and truth takes its place. You were their divine examination, and they copied answers from their ego, instead of listening to the still, small voice that told them, handle this heart with care. And now they must learn. They become the story, the one told not with bitterness but with solemnity. Their choices are the ink, their loss is the headline. And while they sit in the silence of a classroom they thought they'd never enter, heaven begins the work of correction. They are no longer being watched for what they will do next. They are being shaped by what they failed to do before. God delayed justice, not to spare them, but to prepare you. There is a deep mystery in the way God operates, one that often escapes our human desire for immediate balance. We cry for justice when we are wronged, plead for vindication, and ask why those who caused our pain continue to walk freely under the sun, while we carry the burdens they left behind. We imagine divine justice as something swift and visible, something that strikes the wicked with the same force they used against the innocent. But more often, God's justice is not delayed because he is indifferent. It is delayed because he is intentional. When they hurt you, when they lied, betrayed, manipulated, or discarded you without remorse, it felt like the heavens were silent. You prayed, and the answers didn't come in thunder. You waited, and the waiting stretched into weariness. But what appeared to be divine delay was in fact divine design. God was not sparing them, he was preparing you. In Scripture, we see this pattern woven through the lives of those chosen for something greater. Joseph was betrayed by his brothers and thrown into a pit, not because God had forsaken him, but because God was forming something within him that would sustain a kingdom. David was anointed king yet hunted like prey, not because God forgot the oil that flowed over his head, but because the throne requires a heart forged in caves, not comfort. So too with you. The justice you longed for was not forgotten. It was set aside, held back, not to let them escape it, but to allow your spirit to grow into its fullness before you saw its fulfillment. Had God given you immediate satisfaction, you would have missed the sacred development of your inner strength. The tears you cried were watering something holy within you. Your patience was not passive, it was preparation. Your silence was not weakness, it was the sound of God whispering, "Not yet, I am still at work in you." God's justice is not merely the punishment of wrongdoers. It is the restoration of order, the uplifting of the crushed, and the refining of those who were wronged. When he chooses to delay judgment on those who caused you harm, it is because the work he is doing in you must come first, and this is the part the world doesn't understand. Justice is not always about them. Sometimes it's about you becoming ready to see it with grace instead of bitterness, with wisdom instead of vengeance. Those who inflicted pain may believe they've escaped accountability. They live as though nothing happened, as though their choices carry no spiritual consequence. But justice delayed is not justice denied. It is merely justice aligned with God's timing, not yours. And in that space between the wound and the reckoning, something incredible is taking place. You are being changed. You are being strengthened, matured, and sanctified. Your heart, once broken, is learning the sacred art of discernment. Your soul, once trembling, is learning the courage of quiet trust. And all the while, God watches not only what they did, but what you're becoming because of it. He is writing a greater story than mere revenge could offer. He is crafting a testimony where your character becomes the evidence of his presence. And when the moment of justice does arrive, and it always does, it comes not as a burst of anger, but as a holy unraveling. Their peace begins to unravel, their plans lose stability, their conscience awakens. They start to feel the tremors of what they once did to you, but now through the lens of their own consequences. And you, no longer the same person who once begged for justice. Watch not with rage, but with reverence, because now you see it, not just what God is doing to them, but what he first did in you. The delay was necessary. You were not ready when you thought you were. Had God answered your cries in the way you imagined, it would have satisfied your pain but starved your purpose. So instead, he waited. Not because they deserved mercy, but because you deserved more than a shallow victory. You deserved transformation. You deserved to be healed so deeply that even justice would not taste of bitterness. This is the slow work of heaven, carefully preparing the one who was hurt, so that when justice arrives, it does not corrupt, but completes. so that when the scales tip, they do not break you further, but reveal that you are no longer who you were when the pain began. You have been prepared not to rejoice in their fall, but to rise with clean hands and a wiser heart. And now, as we stand at the end of this message, may your heart remember what your pain tried to make you forget. God never turned his face away. Every silent cry, every sleepless night, every breath you took while holding back your tears was heard in heaven and written into a sacred story that is still unfolding. They may have walked away without remorse, but God never walked away from you. You were not abandoned to suffer without purpose. You were not forgotten in your loneliness. What they did in pride, God saw in truth. What they did in secrecy, God recorded with justice. And though it may have looked like they escaped the consequences of their actions, there is no place in this world, nor in the soul, where truth can be hidden forever. God has been working in the stillness, not only to bring them face to face with their own hearts, but to raise you from the place where they left you. They thought your silence was the end of the story, but in God's hands, it was the beginning of your rising. They sowed pain, but you reaped strength. They broke you, but God began to build something no betrayal can touch: character, wisdom, peace, and divine favor. So release the weight you were never meant to carry. Let go of the need to prove your worth or seek their regret. Their lesson has already begun, not because you demanded it, but because God is just. And your healing is already underway, not because they apologized, but because God is merciful. You are no longer defined by what they did. You are defined by who never left you. Walk forward with the quiet confidence that only those refined by fire can carry. Let your story be the proof that even when others leave you in ruins, God writes restoration with his own hand. You were not broken beyond repair. You were broken for the purpose of being rebuilt stronger than ever, watched over, loved deeply, and destined for a justice only heaven could design. Amen.